back into it. They don't want to throw him into the fire too early and re-aggravate that knee injury.
Yeah, I mean, I totally have to agree. And obviously it takes a long time to get into football shape, which is why they have these training camps and these preseasons. But, the Jaguars are going to be playing him on third down, but, I mean, it only takes one play to get injured, so why can't they just play him the whole game? That's just, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that's what I don't get, is if it gives your team the opportunity to win and it makes them better, why not do it? Especially since I think they got the number one pick with or without MJD.
Well, in this go ahead, Phil.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, okay, well, in this situation, it's kind of different. It's one of those touchy scenarios where after a month of no football, no matter how much training you've had, I mean, you see guys, I mean, no matter how much, kind of training that you have, with no pads, just kind of, running cone drills or whatever with any trainers that you would like to have you get in the football shape, quote unquote. I feel like for the Jaguars, it's one of those things, you risk an injury on your first game of the year. I think the long-term benefit for Jacksonville, I mean, they're obviously one of the worst teams in the league. So to have a guy like MJD get hurt week 1, week 2, I don't see the positive impact of, risking him that bad the opening week by giving him 20, 25 carries when, his football shape, even after a week of training camp before their first game, only calls for 5 to 10 carries.
Yeah, I definitely agree with him saying, you can get injured if you carry the ball one time, or if you get, 30 times. It only takes one play. I totally agree with that. That's an excellent point. I think what it more has to do with is even though he's back in camp, this is still the owner playing a little bit of hardball, saying, hey, if you didn't come back, we were going to start this season with Rashard Jennings at running back. We're glad you're back. You're a loved member of this, this community in Jacksonville. But it's just one of those things. It's like, we were prepared to move on without you. We want you in this team. But with him coming back 3 days of practice, they don't want to throw him the keys to the offense again. They wanted to prove that, hey, if something happened where you didn't come back, this is a team that was going to move forward anyway. So I think it's more of the new owner still playing a little bit of hardball with him back in the system.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I gotta completely agree with you. And the thing is also Rashard Jennings isn't a terrible back. He's a solid guy to have in the backfield. And, he definitely has some value for the Jaguars. So I think even though they're using Maurice Jones-Drew on a third down basis, I think that, and plus they're playing the Vikings, so it's really a toilet bowl right there. I mean, you've got, two subpar teams going at each other. So if you're going to pick a week to rest Maurice Jones-Drew, I'd pick this one. So, you guys do have some great points.
Well, thanks, Levy. Actually, for a team like the Jaguars, opening week, you go to, you have to play the Vikings, and, for Minnesota, they have a very powerful defensive line, led by Jared Allen, of course. I mean, he tied the record last year with sacks, but for a team like the Vikings, trying to stop this Jaguars running attack, no matter who's behind quarterback at that running back position, I feel like for Jacksonville, they're undermatched. I mean, so you would rather, have Maurice Jones-Drew in his full form in a couple weeks and have, the owner a little more, hey, okay, we have this guy to stay because, we'll play some hardball there, Phil, and we'll have him, sit the bench for a couple weeks, maybe a couple downs per game, and then, bring him back when, Maurice says, hey, all right, my pride's aside, now I just want to play ball, I don't want anything to do with money to this point.
Yeah, and agreed with Minnesota not necessarily being one of the best teams. You talk about a team with the potential number one pick in the draft, depending on how much Adrian Peterson plays, they could be a team that, fights for the right for that number one pick in a way. But, you look, this is not a game that they're gunning for. And if you look at their schedule, their next two games, they play Houston in Jacksonville, and then they go at Indianapolis to play the Andrew Luck-led Colts. So those are two divisional games back-to-back. So if there's one game that they want to ease him into and then get ready for those two definitely more important games, I think it's the right move by Jacksonville.
Yeah, I got to agree. And actually, I have to go. So thank you guys so much for having me on. And I look forward to calling in sometime in the future.
Yes,
of course.
All right,
thank you, man. Have a good one.
All right, thank you.
All right, that was Daniel Levy on the line talking MJD and Jaguars football. And, it's debatable to have, Vikings, Jaguars, and maybe even throw a team like the Titans in the running for the first overall pick. So for I mean, for Maurice Jones-Drew, it's one of those lose-lose situations. You're back on the field, with the owner so hard on not getting a new deal to hold out for over a month. It's one of those things. All right, now the first month of my season is widely in jeopardy. Not just not getting the carries and trying to battle for that league leading rusher for yet another year, but also you're risking injury. I mean, it's just a lose-lose overall for Jacksonville and a lose-lose for this running back.
Yeah, and listening to Maurice Jones-Drew's press conference, this doesn't seem like typical. I want more money. I'm going to stay home till I get more money. Here's a guy. He wears number 32 on his chest because every team passed on him. In the NFL draft, and he thanks Jacksonville for giving him the opportunity. And pretty much what he's saying is, look at the work I've done. I just want to get paid for what I've done. Nothing more, nothing less. So overall, I think as far as him being with the Jaguars, it'll end up working out.
Yeah, and if I think it comes down to, from an ownership's perspective, how well does he play this year? If he racks up another century mark in rushing, adds up 200 or 300 more yards in receiving, I feel like it's, for ownership, it's like, okay, now we can give him the big contract. He is going up there in years, however. I mean, for a running back, once you pass the age of, say, 27, outside of maybe Marshawn Lynch, you don't see a lot of guys that are still pounding the rock 200, 300 times a year and being very productive. So for Jacksonville, we'll give you a big deal, but, I mean, it's just hurting our end because you're on the downfall, son.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, and that may have been what hindered some of the, if any, trade talks that were done, because if he's going to go to another team, they have to give him that contract. And there's not a lot of guys that want to give you that big money running back contract if you're, on the wrong end of, say, 25 or 26. So I think that may have played a big part into why they weren't able to trade him as easily as, one might think.
And, for Jacksonville, another lose-lose situation. Let's head over to Miami now. One of those situations now for ownership, you're scratching your head all the way because with so many wideouts, not only getting cut, but, Chad Johnson, it was I was pretty hard-pressed to see him sticking around. Glad to see him finally leave, that organization. So much, drama in just the past week that he was there. Now, Miami has to do without Roberto Wallace. He got cut to make the 53, and now, I mean, outside of Devon Best, there's no receiver in that organization that you've even heard of before. So for Miami, it's. I mean, you're riding a new quarterback this year. Chad Henne's still one of those young guys. Maybe he can throw more interception or touchdowns to interceptions this year. Versus last, but I mean, for Miami, it's time to move on, and it's time to go with Ryan Tannehill. And without a receiver, Miami certainly looks to be on the downfall this year.
Yeah, you look at this team. As far as receivers goes, they have 6 receivers on the roster. You have Anthony Armstrong, Devon Best, Brian Hartland, Rashard Matthews, Marin Moore, and Leganu Nene. And aside from Nene, and if you are a Washington fan, you might know Anthony Armstrong. But none of these guys jump out at you. The number one, it seems that it would be Devon Best just because he's, been in that system and does seem to know where he belongs. But overall, it's easy for any team to say, yeah, we should go out and sign this guy and this guy. But, with Ryan Tannehill, if you want him to have any sort of success in his first year, in his rookie year, you got to get him a little bit more weapons because I don't know how you can, in good conscience, go into a season with that as your receiving core.
Yeah, and for Miami, a lot of questions all over the receiving unit, and it doesn't help that your running back, is having more talk off the field than play on. Reggie Bush claiming, "Hey, I'm going to be the league's leading rusher." It's like, I think Reggie Bush needs to just take a seat and, hey, you're part of this team. And Joe Philbin obviously is one of those disciplined guys. He'll let you go when, you're making more play off than on the field. And we also have a question on the line. You can, tag this into Miami as well. But Chad Spiney, part of, Facebook, leading us here with our first comment ever on NFL Goal Line on Facebook. He says that the Jaguars, he thinks, are the surprise team for the 2012-13 NFL season, and you can tie this also over to Miami. Which team do you feel will be the more sleeper team, Phil, with Jacksonville, and they finally have MJD back versus, Miami? They don't really have that offense that, flashes at all this year.
Yeah, I definitely think if you're comparing Jacksonville to Miami, I think it'd be safe to say that Jacksonville has a better team on paper, and I could see them having the better than Miami. If anything, Jacksonville was last year's version of the Miami Dolphins this year. Their receiving core, there wasn't a lot there, which definitely showed in their gameplay. So you look at them now, they went out and they signed a first round pick, drafted as I was saying before, Justin Blackman, and they bring in Leonard Robinson, and they bring in some firepower, because without it, I don't know how much longer Blaine Gabbert would have lasted. And you already have a Pro Bowl tight end there, Mercedes Lewis. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how both these teams go. But I think you talking about the Jaguars not necessarily moving in the right direction. I think they made some sort of stride getting that kind of talent, and Miami should take notes, because if they're going to get anything, they need more talent at receiver.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Phil, and it was kind of Miami's version last year for Jacksonville, and believe it or not, Blaine Gabbert, with all the criticism he's taken, he's made strides this year, and he's a veteran. Sure, he's only a second-year quarterback, and sure, Jacksonville doesn't necessarily have that receiver, but neither does Miami. And also, you also have a guy back there in MJD that maybe after the first month can get it done. And for Mercedes Lewis, Miami doesn't have that Pro Bowl tight end that the Jaguars have, and for Lewis, last year you can't get any worse than not having a single touchdown catch till the final couple weeks of the year. So for Jacksonville, as long as they play like how they can on paper, as you mentioned, Phil, I feel like for Jacksonville, it's one of those things. Sure, they're mentioned, among one of the worst teams in the league, but if they play like they can, and if Gabbert doesn't, takes down the turnover differential for Jacksonville, I feel like this could be a 5 or 6 win team. Obviously, one of those franchises in transition. But for Jacksonville, it's one of those sleeper deals where you don't know where you're going to get going into the year. And as you mentioned early on, they have a pretty tough sketch. First 3 games, obviously very challenging, but for Blaine Gabbert and the Jags, one of those sleeper scenarios where if they win a couple games that they certainly should, then they'll be among one of those top 10 top 10 draft picks instead of the number 1 overall.
Yeah, I could definitely see where Chad is coming from here. I think if you're going to compare these two teams again, who will have the better year, here's what you got to look at, and here's where it really gets interesting. You got to look at the divisions that both these teams are in. You talk about the Dolphins and the AFC East. They got to worry about the Patriots, the Jets, and the Bills. The Bills are better than they've been in years. The Jets are on the decline, but are still going to play tough in the division. And the Patriots, as long as they got that guy in the hoodie, they're going to be a force. You look over at the Jaguar side of things, you got Andrew Luck and the Colts, who, they will be a lot better than last year. But, it's a first-year quarterback. They're still going to have their struggles. Tennessee, they're middle of the pack kind of team. And then you got Houston, who it's their division to lose. I think we can all agree. But they have some holes on defense, losing, Mario Williams and players like that. So their division, if you look at the talent and the level it'll take to compete within the division, Jaguars definitely has a much easier road.
Yeah, and for Jacksonville, it's as long as MJD gets his carries later on in the year, doesn't have that injury that obviously Jacksonville fans are concerning, and if it's all about the quarterback, ladies and gentlemen. If Blaine Gabbert can turn down the interceptions and throw a few touchdowns, he has a reliable red zone target in Lewis. As long as Lewis catches the football, the Jaguars will be somewhat of a force in the South, with the Titans and their quarterback issues. And then obviously you have the Indianapolis Colts, a young team, despite that defense that really is getting old and needs to be revamped with some new energy over there. So for Jacksonville, I think it's one of those sleeper teams. Meanwhile, Miami, it's very tough for a first-year head coach in any system, let alone a team like the Dolphins, where there's so many pieces that you're just trying to plug in and see if he can make a difference. And also, we didn't really mention the losing end of that Vontae Davis trade this year. It seems like Miami is invested towards next season as they give away Vontae for draft picks. They're looking for next year's progression, and then obviously Ryan Tannehill. You don't go with the rookie quarterback without hoping for the future instead of right now, except for if you're Indianapolis. So for Jacksonville, it's one of those scenarios where just try and get 5 or 6 wins, get a somewhat reasonable draft scenario while still